Good evening. I declare the Agenda Briefing Forum of the 18th of November held in Council Chambers at Level 2, 388 Hay Street, open at 5:31pm. Welcome everyone. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the land we're meeting on this evening, and I recognise their ongoing connection to the land and waterways of Subiaco. I'll take attendances now, and I think we're down just a single councillor. Councillor De Vries is an apology for this evening. Councillor Powell is joining electronically. Welcome, Councillor, and everyone else is present and accounted for in the chambers. And I know we've got the CEO and his 4 directors from the executive leadership team as well, complemented, of course, by a number of other staff members who will draw on as needed. Any leave of absence requests we will deal with next week at the OCM. Councillors, I'll ask now if there's any disclosures of interest for this evening's briefing. Doesn't look like it. Okay, there's no approved deputations. Announcement time. I have been asked to make an announcement in relation to the annual electors meeting. The annual electors meeting was previously scheduled for the 2nd of December, and it's had to be rescheduled to Thursday, the 18th of December 2025, because the City is awaiting the Auditor General's final report, and that report will be presented to Council at the 16th of December OCM. So the intent is that the annual electors meeting will follow on Thursday, the 18th of December, 2 days after the final OCM for this evening, and for this year, and public notice will go out tomorrow on the City's website and social media channels, and will be included in the post next weekend as well. Okay, we can get on to the agenda items now, councillors. There's 6, 5 of which relate to tenders of different kinds. We'll start with C1, the tender for the provision of the supply of irrigation servicing and repairs. Any questions on C1, councillors? Councillor Pine.
Thank you. I would like to advise. Basically, these contracts have got a significant value. And with inflation having been rampant over the years, I'd like to understand by how much have costs gone up or down as a percentage of compared to an equivalent contract that you have in place, just to give a feel for that.
Director Technical Services.
Thank you for the question. So in relation to this tender, I know we've been discussing a few of the tenders. This one, and I'll look to my manager for Parks Environment, but I believe it's increased by 8% since when we last called it, so it's been 8% increase, but mindful that the increases have varied across the various service tenders that we've called in the last couple of years.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you, and through you, Mayor. Look, I'm just interested in what's listed as option 3. That is to hold on, I'll find it just here. Not to award and re-advertise the tender. But the qualifier to that is, should the council choose to re-advertise, the City would not have a contract in place for irrigation services or repairs over the summer months. So really, I'm asking, is that truly an option? If the alternative is that, our lawns and trees are going to die over summer?
Mr. Hambley.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Powell. So I think what they're speaking to is obviously logistically it's quite difficult if we don't have a contract in place to get a surety of service. Obviously, there are some provisions if something was to be truly an urgent piece of work, but even that has severe limitation under the Local Government Act and our procurement. So for simplicity, it's the simplest and easiest way to ensure that we do maintain these core services and make sure that our green spaces are well kept. So it'd be a very difficult situation if we were to re-advertise.
If I could ask a follow-up question, please, Mayor.
Yes, please do. Thank you.
Yeah, look, I think that summarises why I think it is probably not really an option. It would only be an option if this contract had perhaps come up earlier, and then if it hadn't been successful, there would have been time to re-advertise. But to re-advertising now is not an option, and that's the point I'm trying to get to.
I think the point's understood at our end, Councillor Powell. Councillor Fife, unless Councillor Powell is still going with the questions. Thank you. Councillor Fife.
So as a follow-up to Councillor Powell's question, what capacity does the admin have outside of the appointment of a contractor to manage its irrigation services in the event of a tender not being awarded at this time? So does put it another way, what percent of the irrigation maintenance and management is carried out by the contractor versus the core team?
Mr. Director.
Sorry.
Thank you for your question. So we do have, we do some reticulation and irrigation works in-house, but I would refer to probably the Manager of Parks and Environment who will be able to give a much more fulsome answer.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of the absolute metrics, we don't have those absolute metrics. It tends to be done more on an ad hoc basis based on the need and then the scale of repair. Certainly for this contract, we do look to our contractors for more complex and larger scale work. We would be able to go out to the market in a more ad hoc manner if we didn't have a contract. However, we certainly want to have a contract in place to give surety of service over this time.
So as a further follow-up question, I guess if the tenders come up again, it's probably pertinent to what Councillor Powell was saying, that these contracts be awarded or recommended in winter rather than at the beginning of summer, where you feel like your hands are pretty much tied in terms of making a decision. So potentially for future contracts that they be awarded in winter.
Mr. Hambley, it sounds logical. What's the response from the staff perspective?
Thank you for the question. So I think that probably the main aspect and probably why our agenda is so full of tenders is actually just probably to bring it to your attention that the recent caretaker provisions have come in. So what that means is previously it precluded us from awarding contracts except for under certain circumstances, but now the caretaker provisions actually are such that you can't even advertise during that period unless you prior advertise. So effectively we had a longer blackout period for this, but what will be done for future contracts is to avoid that caretaker period now it's in place, such that we won't be in the situation where we have trying to award contracts close to the start dates. So we'll have more time up our sleeve.
Thank you. Any other questions on C1? Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Just a quick clarification. I just on the just to clarify the date that it was advertised for tender. Was it the 3rd of September or the 29th of August? Thanks.
Mr. Hambley, or we'll put that one to the manager, perhaps.
Yeah, the advertisement was the 29th of August, and as Director Hambley said, we have been limited by the caretaker period.
Thank you, Mr. Pickard. Okay, thank you, councillors. I think that's C1 done. We'll move on to C2, the provision of, well, the tender for the provision of grounds maintenance services for Subiaco Oval and environs. Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, and through you, Matt. Does the city have an existing or similar contract for ground maintenance that could have been amended to incorporate this work at Subiaco Oval?
Again, we'll ask the manager for advice. Giles Pickard.
Through you, Mayor. In this case, no. We undertake the majority of ground services and maintenance through our field and operational staff. This is a new large area that we've deemed to be outside of our current capacity to maintain, hence the contract. We do have some smaller contracts in place. However, we wouldn't, under our procurement guidelines, be able to modify those contracts to take over such a large piece of work.
Councillor Jones.
A little follow-on from that, I guess, would be long-term, would the plan be to be doing this in-house in future?
Mr Manager.
Yep, through you, Mayor. Certainly longer term, when we have surety of our location and scale, it's actually a key restricting element for us in terms of the need for larger contracts like this. We'd need to get additional staff and particularly additional fleet and operational requirements associated with that. We're currently very limited for space, so hence that was a major contributing factor in the need to contract this out. Certainly, we are looking at how we would be able to amalgamate any future contracts in the future if we needed to keep going to grounds maintenance or to bring that resource in-house with additional staff capacity.
Thank you. Separately, I just want to be entirely clear about this. This doesn't include management of the playing surface itself. It's everything else except the playing surface because we haven't taken that over yet.
Mr Pickard.
Yes, through you, Mayor. Yes, that is correct. We haven't yet taken over the playing surface.
Councillor Pine.
Could you indicate whether it would be significantly cheaper if you were doing this in-house versus what you've been able to secure through this bidder?
Mr Hambley.
Thank you for the question. So, as Giles has mentioned, because it really wasn't a feasible option at this stage, we haven't done a cost comparison for what it would cost to do in-house as opposed to outsourcing. If and when we have that capability with potentially a new depot, that's something that we definitely run, and that's the analysis we do prior to even going to contract.
I think I saw another hand a moment earlier. No, thought I did. Councillor Fife.
Yeah, my question was almost the same as Councillor Pine's question, which was that as a general principle within that space of parks and gardens maintenance, there's a few contracts obviously here. I'm new to the game. I don't know how many other contracts exist over time, but the relative cost of getting contractors in versus doing it in-house, is there a metric or an understanding that you can give us as to generally how that works? Is it generally cheaper or better for the ratepayers that these works be subcontracted out or done in-house?
I feel like that's almost a financial question. And the CEO is going to pick up the tools and answer this one. Mr Cameron.
In some ways, it's also a bit of a philosophical question around insourcing versus outsourcing and the benefits, particularly that we find deriving from people who work for us have such great knowledge, not only of the infrastructure and the actual parks itself, but the people that frequent the parks and chat to them. So a lot of our and I'm not saying a contractor couldn't do this, but a lot of the really great feedback that we get from the community is actually from the people because they've got a lot of ownership on it. So we have in the past run some analysis, particularly on waste, because we're one of the few local governments that insource and do our own waste collection. And in the past, given that we've got quite a peculiar waste setup with going down laneways and actually not all we've only got one side arm. So the work we did on that found that actually it was much cheaper to do the work inside ourselves. I don't believe we've actually undertaken that analysis, but I think that would form part of this work as we get more and more elements that become normalised through Subiaco East, that we then get the scale where it works potentially to put on extra crews, usually a truck and a couple of people and all the whippersnippers and all the things that go with it. So I think this will be a pretty good test case for us. We'll know exactly what this costs for the area, and that will be able to be able to assess. But I think, as the managers quite rightly pointed out, also there's limitations just within currently where we're housed, and the Mount Claremont opportunity gives us a good opportunity to rethink that in terms of once we've got a new depot as well.
Okay, any final questions on C2? There is one from Councillor Powell.
Yes, and thank you, and through you, Mayor. Look, it's very similar to the question I asked on C1. And look, I do understand that there's been a caretaker period and that might have put things a little bit out of lockstep. But the question I'm asking is, though, are we really, option 3 again, are we really being given an option? Or should it not be really on the agenda?
The CEO sets the agenda, so the CEO ought to have an answer for this. CEO, Mr. Cameron.
So I'll answer the question a bit more broadly in terms of contract management and managing that better, because the point you're raising around bringing these matters to council earlier is a good point. And we've got a new procurement person sitting in place, Darren Turner, for those that haven't met. And we have made a greater focus in terms of the procurement and the way we're doing things. And one of the modules that we haven't been able to implement as well is that within Technology 1 is contract management. And they'll have all the sorts of flags, etc., to identify bringing these matters to council probably sooner rather than later. Part of the work they've actually done is, probably for the first time in many years, is to put together a complete spreadsheet database at this stage that will then go, under Hayley's guidance as well, that will then form part of what goes into Technology 1. So that will give us good bring-ups about when we'll be able to work back from these things and potentially bring them to council sooner rather than later. In terms of having the option of essentially not proceeding, that still is an option for council. I take your point, Councillor Powell, in terms of its practical applicability in these cases, but it still is an option, and we would then have to manage if council were determined not to do that, because as you well know, our job is to implement council resolutions.
Perhaps I'll offer an observation followed by a question. The observation is that, and I'm going to take a liberty and jump ahead to C4 because there's options there as well, but the writer of that report has listed options and then I suppose provided commentary as to why certain options are recommended or are viable and why at least one in that case are not. I just wonder, CEO, if there's scope for report writing across the board to have renewed focus on meaningful, viable options, and where we're listing an option just because it is on the face of thing an option available to council, but it's not a preferred option. We perhaps remind staff to walk us through why that is, so that we're not walking into options that really lead us nowhere. That second part was the question.
Thanks. I think that's a fair call. We do have those conversations internally as well, particularly because we try and attempt to have some consistency as well presented in the agenda. I suppose this one was a little bit more obvious because all the reports, bar the financials, are a tender report, but the point you make is quite appropriate given we've got to try and get that consistency when each of the business units are required to do their own tenders. So it's all part of that package of bringing contract management into a more centralised approach.
Thank you. So top marks to the Manager of Engineering Services, Randia Karma. Thank you, Randia. Okay, any more questions on C2? Councillor Pine.
On the options, is there a fourth option, which is basically deferred handover of the area so that the handover happens all together, the oval and the surrounding?
CEO?
Yeah, look, I'll probably take that first, and we could probably give an updated briefing at another time in terms of those conversations. I think it's important for the new elected members and those that are continuing elected members to sort of have that information. I think the main important point is that we're working towards that, and hopefully we'll be able to provide further information as to when that date can be. But as with every normalisations, even through the old Subi Redevelopment Authority, it was always a negotiation process to work out when the best time to take it over was. The key is that we're both clear about when that is, and so that we pick it up as soon as they conclude. So, but it does vary depending upon the circumstances, and I think that's appropriate.
Thank you, Councillor. Any final questions, councillors, on C2? It doesn't look like it, so I think we're ready for C3. The tender for the provision of tree management services. Any questions on C3, councillors? Councillor Pine.
Just got a question on the scope of the contract and the responsibilities on the scope. Can you clarify who decides on the treatment of a tree if you've got, just a general treatment on a tree? And the second one is really on the scope of the contract with respect to treatment for the shot borers. Could you clarify the scope of the works included in that contract?
I think we'll hear from Director Technical Services, unless you want to delegate it. Okay, to the manager, Mr. Giles.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, thank you for the question. In terms of scope and tree works, I will try to be brief because the scope can be quite large with tree works. The scope of works that we assign to this contractor is determined in line with the city's recommendations from our Urban Forest Technical Officer and in consultation and collaboration with our Technical Officer. We have our own arboriculture team who do undertake a range of works. However, we have the contract in place to undertake particularly high-risk works and also specialist works that need specialised climbing and other services that the contractor is able to give us. In terms of the polyphagous shot hole borer works, it's quite similar. Thankfully, the city's been very proactive in its response to PSHB, which has led to us doing limb removals rather than the mandated approach, which the state government have actually now pulled back on from whole-scale tree removals. So they're things as well in terms of scope. It will very much be a case-by-case basis. If based on the recommendations of our Urban Forest Technical Officer or an independent arborist, which the contract does allow for that arboricultural advice. For example, we may have a tree that requires one limb to be pruned. That could be part of the scope, or it could be a full-scale removal, and the contract covers the span of those works.
So what I'm understanding in simple terms, essentially, is that the city decides on the treatment in collaboration with the contractor, but ultimately the responsibility of the treatment sits with the city. Thank you.
Yes, correct.
Councillor Fife.
This is, well, I'm not sure if I should ask this question or not, but it's with respect to the polyphagous shot hole borer and its management going forward. And maybe this is for another time and not at this meeting, but my understanding is that this is a pest that we need to manage, and that it's not just going to be on people's lawns or curbs or in parks. It's going to be in people's gardens. Does the city have any authority? Will this contractors have any authority to intervene or to make recommendations or to enforce potentially a hot spot within a private area? And I'm not sure whether or not this is part of what this contract will do.
Judging by his body language, the CEO's got an answer for this, but it would be because he's been at the coal face and he's been to a lot of industry discussions about this. But Director Technical Services, did you want to have a shot? Sorry, the pun, and then we'll let the CEO bore into it further.
Yeah. You'll have to pardon me. I'll avoid any further puns. So I guess the simple answer, and I'll let the CEO elaborate, but the simple answer is this contract wouldn't allow us to do that on behalf of the resident, and we can intervene on private properties. Certainly private properties will, and we often will give recommendations as far as some arborists that people can contact, but it's up to them to to manage that on their private properties, because we have no say on that. And obviously the state government has now since pulled back on its intervention as far as on private properties, where previously, before we moved into the management response, which covers the Subiaco area, DPIRD would actually intervene and actually undertake works, but now they've since withdrawn from that, and all they will probably do is maybe give some advice to you through the use of their app, and that's about it. So that's probably the long and short of it, but I know the CEO would like to probably say a bit more.
Mr. Cameron.
Thanks. So we're certainly advocating for the state to support private residents in this, because they don't have a contract like we have a contract. But their approach now that they've moved to management, and even for a time when under the previous arrangements where we were in Zone A, they weren't sort of as active. So we're definitely advocating strongly through WALGRA and as a number of CEOs meeting with DPIRD regularly, and we think it would be appropriate for the state government to step up in this space. However, they wouldn't mandate it, even though perhaps potentially on some of the amplifier type trees it should be the case, because the biggest challenge that I've sort of tried to explain to, and they know, is that this could be quite devastating, and if the private realm is not being managed in the same way as the public realm in which we're managing it, and each local government as well is doing it not to the same extent that we are, because we've got preventative, or trying to do preventative measures as well, then the potential impact could probably be significant, and it certainly has in South Africa and Southern California, where I think in Southern California it's like 30% tree loss. It's quite devastating. We hope that maybe our climate is slightly different, but because I think last year we lost more trees to other diseases and pests due to the heat stress, because of the long period in which we had didn't have the rain, but maybe that also helped slow shut-hole. There's a whole bunch of stuff we don't really know, but we're probably the few local, one of the only one I know of that's trying to do preventative trees on trees that are not infested in the public realm, and then we also deal with the ones, actually, as Giles was saying, in terms of those that have been infested and trying particular products, which we haven't gone out to the media, but seems to be working reasonably well at this stage. But the fact is, we just don't know how devastating this thing's going to be, and we certainly are lobbying for the state government to step up in terms of their ability to support the private residents, because otherwise, if the choice is that they just determine not to do anything, I don't think that's a great place to be in.
Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. My limited understanding of shot-hole borer is that it's a seasonal thing, and every spring there's likely to be a potential explosion of shot-hole borer. The estimate of the cost per annum is $350,000. What capacity is there for the contract to accommodate a potential explosion in shot-hole borer that requires significant additional remediation or limb pruning or removal, or for that matter, any other type of climate, catastrophe or whatever? What's the capacity for the contract? Because it's a 3-year contract, isn't it? What's the capacity for the contract to be expanded beyond that average per annum?
Mr. Hambley.
So thank you for the question. So the simple answer is we've got a schedule of rates, so the contract can respond to the needs of the urban forest. So if there's particular events, whether it's shot-hole borer or other pests or other things impacting urban forests that requires this additional servicing, the contract can respond accordingly to that. Obviously, this is an estimate, and hopefully what Colin's outlined doesn't eventuate, but if something does arise, the contract can respond to that, is the short answer.
Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. My question's relating to the criteria in the confidential attachment. The qualitative criteria and the value for money consideration. I'm not going to be asking specific questions around dollar value. I was just wanting to ask a question around the scoring, the qualitative scoring.
It is a bit difficult to discuss the confidential agendas during the public briefing, but we can always discuss that outside of this setting.
Thank you. Yeah, look, it's just something I only just, I didn't have the question before. I was looking at this now. Thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? I think that's C3 done. C4, the tender for the servicing and repairs of heavy light vehicles and major plant. Any questions on C4, councillors? Doesn't look like it. Okay, C5, the final tender for this evening, the tender for the Mount Claremont, well, architect services for the Mount Claremont depot. Questions on C5, councillors? Councillor Fife.
We received an outline of this project from Joel last week. It seems to me to be, by awarding a contract at this stage, that it seems to be a preamble to basically accepting that this work goes ahead without. I don't feel like I have yet a comprehensive understanding of this new site, what it looks like. I'm just wondering whether or not, and maybe it's beyond the scope of this particular meeting, that we can be walked across that site a little bit more in more detail before being asked to consider this particular tender.
Director Corporate Services.
Yeah, so thank you for your question. So basically this tender is really just about an architect to help to flesh out the project. The approval of the project itself, there's a number of governance mechanisms. So one is, for example, just purely through the budget process. So in order to go ahead with the capital work project of this nature, council would need to approve it through the budget process. So approving this tender is simply just to get the architect off the ground so that we can have some design options in hand and consider how best that the project could proceed if it did proceed, and how we would shape up the site for the future. Just noting there have been prior council resolutions around, for example, gaining a management order over the site. So there have been previous council decisions to say, let's get this site sorted out so that we can consider putting a depot on the site without having decided to proceed with the depot project at this point.
CEO.
But absolutely, particularly during once the architect's appointed, it would be handy once they've got to a particular point in time for us to have a elected member workshop out there, and they could take you through all the suggestions, and that would assist, as Emma's quite rightly pointed out, through the budget process, because council would need to adopt a budget at the right time. And that could go through the optionality as well, because there'll be a range of options that we could proceed either to do all the work at once, or we could do it in stages, because it's quite a significant site. So it definitely would be worthwhile. Once you got the architect on board, they do a bit of work and work through some of those options, and then to actually go on site and go through those options, I think would be helpful for elected members before determining the budget.
Oh. Sure, Councillor Burns. Hang on, Mike.
The councillor's
microphone.
question was, can we get on site before deciding this matter? And I just heard a whole bunch of answers about we can get on site after deciding this matter. Yes or no, unless I got it wrong. You know, I mean, I thought it was, can we get there before next Tuesday, was what he was asking. And if the answer's no, fine, but the answer wasn't no. It was we can go another time after we do it. Sorry. Maybe I'm deaf.
Well, I don't know. Maybe there was a follow-up, or Councillor Fife, were you dissatisfied with the question, and now that the I suppose the question's been re-put, What are you seeking? An actual walkthrough or a metaphorical walkthrough on a desktop level?
What I think would be appropriate would be before we committed to a $750,000 spend on an architect for the whole project, that there might be a smaller spend of a concept idea that we could then consider before we appoint an architect for a full contract. It seems to me to be a little bit of putting the cart before the horse to have the full architectural drawings if we're not resolved as to what we're going to do in terms of the building yet.
I think there may be a disconnect between the amounts of information that pre-existing elected members may have and which others are still catching up upon. I mean, how do we close the gap? Director, Corporate Services, perhaps you're best placed to talk us through some ideas.
Sure. There's multiple options, and sorry, I misunderstood your question. I think I was implying out of your question that you thought you wanted to know whether we were deciding on the project by awarding this tender, but I think you want also confidence that we're awarding the tender on the right basis as well. So look, this decision is going to council next Tuesday. So there are two things you can do: either seek more information before next Tuesday that could involve a site visit, or council could resolve to defer the item until it's comfortable to make a decision on that. So, yeah.
We can do a site visit, I think, is the takeaway. Councillor Pine.
Could I ask a clarification? My understanding is the award is for the whole project, and whilst there are options to curtail and stop the work at any point in time, so actually the minimum commitment, could you comment on what the minimum commitment is for that contract?
Director, Corporate Services.
Thank you for your question. Yes, so there is no minimum commitment. Essentially, we have the right to to terminate at our convenience, so only paying for what's been delivered so far. Part of the reason that you put it out for the whole project is because for one, to attract architects to the project if it does proceed, but also it's rather awkward if you only procure for the first part of the contract and then you decide to proceed and then you need to go out for the second part of the contract because you're kind of bound to some extent to the initial architect, not strictly, but it makes it more complicated. So it is simpler in essence to go out for the whole project now, noting that it is up to council if they wish to cease the work at any point in time.
Okay, any other questions on the agenda item? Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I just wondered, with the procurement policy, how much, if that played into, how that played into this with, local businesses.
Director, Corporate Services.
Sure. I think as much as it usually would in terms of, and it's a good question, which we covered just earlier this afternoon in our first Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee. So we have a section of our procurement policy which says that we are to give consideration to local economic benefit, and particularly where, the value for money consideration is the same for two tenderers, that we give preference to the local vendor. So that would have been considered equally for this project, and I understand we did get some, at least one local submission that I can think of. I actually am not 100% confident if the recommended tenderer is local or not. Thank you, people. But just the same as any other tender, it would have been considered in that way.
Councillor Fife.
So my question is, what impact would delaying the awarding of the tender for a couple of months potentially have on the viability of the project?
Director, Corporate Services.
It would just, the project would still be viable, just noting that I suppose one consideration would be that building costs tend to escalate over time. We want to go about this project in a really reasoned and measured fashion, so we want to make sure that we get the right architect and the right advice on how to get the best value for money on this project. So on the one hand, there's no rush. On the other hand, there's just the usual considerations that you would think of in terms of what the delay would, nothing that you wouldn't have thought of, I suppose.
Perhaps if I could just jump in, there is one other element in that it may have been contained in the report, so hopefully the briefing we provided, but there are 2 pieces of land that we lease as well. So the longer that takes in terms of working out the project and how we commence and how we move people in, there's a risk associated with 2 leased properties as well. But I think we'll probably be okay.
Councillors, any other questions on the agenda item? Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. I must admit to being a tad distracted, but I'll get back to that later. So just bear with me. Thank you for everybody that's indicated from the administration that delays are possible. That's what I heard correctly, and how they affect what we do next week. I appreciate it. I would ask that, and it can be done, it doesn't need to be announced now. I'm not seeking that, but I'd like to know who the panel comprised of that was assessing the numerics. Again, I apologise, I'm distracted. I'd also like to see a copy, and it can be sent to other councillors as you choose to, of the contract that would be attached to the award. And further to that, I would also like to see a copy of exactly in the bids being made what was asked of the participants in the tender, to how they demonstrated themselves. If I could have all that as soon as possible so that I could evaluate it in light of making a decision next Tuesday, I'd appreciate it. Somebody just says yes they can, it'd be great.
The indications I'm getting is that that's completely doable, and some of the information's in the confidential attachments, so we won't discuss qualitative or quantitative assessments of tenderers in this public forum, but it's all there for you and other councillors.
Well, the numerics are, but I'd like a little more depth to it.
Yep. The numerics are there, but there is some additional information that can also be provided.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Pine.
Maybe could you comment on the urgency of doing this project? What are the real benefits of doing this project quickly?
Ms. Williston.
Yep. So I guess if you look at the current situation, we've got our outside staff working across a number of locations. They've been doing that for a while now, since we demolished the old depot site at 2 Upham Street. So it's not an ideal situation, but in some sense they're kind of used to it. We're looking to see what we can do with the site, in the near term without having to have any architect services or spend a lot of money. So, for example, we're looking to get some of the waste teams into the existing buildings on the site. Just the provision of just a better roof over your head with better basic amenities is somewhere we can start without this project even going ahead. So as indicated in the project, there are some considerations around priority and phasing that we need to work through, that an architect will be well placed to help us to work through with our staff as well, and forming user groups around that. We don't anticipate necessarily needing to do all of the project at once, but if it appears to be more cost effective, for example, to do so, then that would be a consideration also. So
just to clarify, what you're saying is essentially you could move in staff into that building without having an architect involved. Is that right?
Some stuff, yeah. So I'd have to get across the detail in terms of all of that, but there's a lot more requirements. So, for example, if we want to get our waste trucks on site and get them moving around things, get a plant nursery on site, some of the other things in the draft functional specification, like having some storage for our museum objects. There's a kind of a list of things that would be good to consider that we would need to do some work to refurbish the existing site to accommodate.
Maybe I could just jump in. So we are actually just moving probably the one team that we can move in as soon as possible. There's the waste team, and they're up above 2 lots above that. And there is an area that didn't take much to refurbish in terms of just fit it out and be appropriate for a small team of less than 15 people. So that piece of work is being done, and we'll move them as soon as we can. But as Emma has said, the architect will help us with all the sort of more really expensive bit. And the other bit that's sort of complicating this, in addition to us being there, Claremont, Town of Claremont and City of Vincent as well share elements of that site. So part of that will also be considering potentially in the future how we share certain aspects of that site as well. So there's a few things for the architect to provide us some guidance on in terms of whether we do all of it at one time, other than obviously the waste, because that work's been done now. And I think that's not that many, maybe next week, hopefully. It's a week next week, week after, soon. But the rest of the site has some probably more complex assets that a bit of analysis is required to assist us in develop what the scope of work might be for council to consider in the future.
Councillor Fife.
So, given that it's one big site and it's going to be split between a few different councils, all the different councils having their own architect design their own bit, I mean, it seems to me to be, if that is the case, to be a little bit ridiculous, because you might end up having a non-alignment of the things. It seems to me to be, or would it, posed as a question, would it be possible to speak to the other councils to get a collective plan for the site that satisfies everyone without everyone duplicating architectural services?
Director Corporate Services.
Yeah, I can make a start, and the CEO is welcome to chip in. We have certainly been working very closely with the other councils on site, for quite some time now. So first of all, in working to obtain a management order, and then also in discussing plans and opportunities for sharing. There are some timing considerations in terms of not all councils might have the same level of urgency. For example, Vince and I understand would need to move their current depot operations in order to move onto the site, so may not commence at the same time as us. There's also considerations around what can logically be shared. So, for example, staff accommodations can be a little bit challenging, in terms of, if you have a staff issue between 2 staff members, for example, from opposite councils. So just, where the liability sits between respective councils, etc. There are some considerations as to what you can share and what you can't and I think we touched on some of those last week. Happy to go into it in more detail as well further with you offline. But just in terms of, we have discussed with the other councils the idea of sharing architects, and probably the timing is probably a major consideration at the moment.
Councillor Fife.
Yeah, further, I wasn't suggesting that we all share the tea rooms and the accommodations and the showers with the other councils. They might be able to have 3 different lots of mess rooms and whatever. It's more that the whole site would seem to benefit from some consistency. That was the reason for the question in the first place.
Yeah, and I can certainly confirm that we are in close conversation with the staff of the other councils, just in terms of how the planning is going, and the whole executive leadership team of Subiaco was out there with the CEO and Director of Technical Services of Vincent just about a month or 2 ago, just to go over the site and do exactly the kind of thing that you're talking about.
Councillors, any other questions on C5? Okay, Okay, doesn't look like it. The final officer report on this evening's agenda briefing pertains to the financial statements and reports for the month ending 31 October 2025. Any questions on C6, councillors? Councillor Pine.
On the section on the major debtors, can you clarify whether the rates of 26 million are still due by the 31st of October? That seems very large, given that the rates were in the budget was 27 million. So it would indicate that most of the ratepayers haven't paid their rates. Maybe you can comment on that.
Director Corporate Services.
Thank you for your question. Yes, so just to clarify, the information in the report as at 31st of October for rates outstanding, it includes not just rates outstanding, but also things like the emergency services levy and the waste charges. The other elements are on people's rates notices. So it's not quite apples for apples in terms of the 26 that you can see outstanding as at 31st of October and the total amount that was levied. We're just going to potentially make some clarifications to report this week, just to make sure that people understand what we're comparing there. You know, you never expect all of the rates to be paid down at once. As you'll understand, some people pay up front and some people pay by instalment. As of, I think today, there's $17 million of that amount outstanding. So you can see that obviously a lot of it's already been paid.
Maybe I'll ask a follow-up. So when we talk about outstanding debts in this context, that doesn't necessarily mean overdue. It just means has not been paid to the city at the moment.
Yep, that's absolutely correct.
Councillors, questions on C6? Well, it doesn't look like it. Plenty of time to ask more in between sessions, but I think that brings us to the end of the agenda briefing. Or a comment. Is it about the agenda item?
Pretty much, it's just sort of a past CEO has left me a gift and I'm not accepting it. So, considering my life and everything else, so I don't want to be trapped into a gift deal. It was left here without my request and it's sitting there and it's there it stays and what the council does with it, I don't care. It can be sent back to the individual or disposed of, destroyed, whatever else, but the gift is not accepted.
I wasn't expecting that.
I didn't think you were, but I would just rather have it.
Yeah, it's just a shame you ddidn't press the button then. But look, I'll declare the agenda briefing closed at 6:23 p.m. That's closed.